time to attend this webinar. This is the first webinar I've done, and I believe anyone from Neptune's done about Hurricane Ian. We have some insights not only on the storm itself, but our response, along with our partnership with Neptune, and how you can really use that to hopefully better protect your insureds moving forward. Before we go ahead and dive into the ins and outs of Hurricane Ian, I do want to point out that if you do have any questions, you can go ahead and ask those in the chat box or the Q&A. Jean-Luc, along with some other members here, will be answering those questions as we go along. So there may be something we don't cover that you want to learn a little bit more about, a question you may have, feel free to go ahead and put it in there. Before we go into the content itself, I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves from top to bottom. So Shane, if you want to start us off.
Yeah, no problem. So my name is Shane Corcoran. I'm the carrier partnerships lead here. That's I guess a fancy title to say that I oversee our workers' comp product, our general liability, professional liability, and our flood product here. Also our Liberty Mutual product that's on our platform. So anything that is digitally distributed is kind of falls under my realm. And that means that I make sure everything's operationalized, both our brokers and our carriers are happy, and make sure it's a seamless process for everyone throughout the quoting and binding and whole policy life term, I should say. I've been in insurance since I graduated college, pretty much. I actually started as a personal lines broker, realized I can only add cars to auto policies for so long, and eventually got into commercial. And now I've been with Neptune for coming up on 4 years. But I'll pass it over to Morgan now.
Hey everyone, I'm Morgan. I'm on the marketing team here at Neptune. It says here that I expand our portfolio of products for small businesses. I do not do that. That sounds really important. But I just work together with our product partners and make sure that we can get you all the information that you need and help set up these webinars to educate you and share information about current events and ways that you can protect your clients better.
Awesome. And I'm Jean-Luc. I'm the Chief Customer Officer over at Neptune. I oversee sales and services and work very closely with our strategic partnerships, such as everyone at and that works with Neptune. And I work very closely with Alex on the commercial side, and I'm here to support you and help you in any way that you need assistance.
And last but not least, my name is Alex. I'm the Director of Commercial Lines. I handle a lot of our digital partnerships and distribution on the commercial side, as well as dealing with our commercial products, apartments, non-residential, and RC BAP. The primary focus today will be on those non-residential products and what you're doing with BOPs and Neptune. That being said, I do want to go ahead and give us kind of an overview because we're talking about flooding and more specifically Hurricane Ian. And there were multiple types of flooding involved in this event. You have coastal or surge flooding. So if you're by the water, this is a rise in tides causing an inundation of the land. You also have fluvial flooding or river overflow. This really can result from multiple different things, whether it's heavy rainfall or snow melt, even glaciers unfreezing. A lot of big floods over history have been a result of that, but it's really a combination of duration and intensity. How long is that rain falling and how much rain in that short period of time? Because you can have a foot of rain in a couple hours and that can cause a major river flood. Or you could have an inch of rain over the course of 30 days in a month, and it can lead up to river overflow as well. And lastly, we have the downstream effect. Pluvial flooding or flash flooding is kind of a subset, in my opinion. It's really the dropping of water from rain, but it could also be, in many cases, it depends on the geography. So if it's a flat surface, it could just be that accumulation on the ground. But if it's a mountainous surface, then you could have water rushing downhill off a mountain, causing even more damage. If you look at Hurricane Ida, in New York City, a lot of that rainwater dropped, but it's so urbanized in that area, it didn't really have anywhere to go. Florida is very marshy and swampy. We were able to soak up a lot of that water. But in an area like New York, which is very urbanized, It hits the concrete, it has to go somewhere, and it ends up in people's businesses and homes. And even in droughts, if you have very dry land, even an inch of water can cause a mudslide or other serious flash flooding. I do want to take a time and show you some of these videos because I think these visuals are very helpful for when you're talking to your insureds about the type of flooding. You don't want to be talking to someone in Tennessee or Pennsylvania about surge flooding. That's not a risk that they generally face. But so you really want to understand these types of floodings, because when you do get people saying flooding will never happen to me, it's not going to flood in my area, you want to be able to take a look at their geography, their unique situation, and talk about the flood risks that they have in their property. Because talking about Naples, Florida, and surge flooding to someone in the interior of the country really is not going to get that point across. So let me go ahead and quickly bring us over to YouTube here.
Question. Would you build a website for a major brand with more than 200 million users using Wix? Well, we did.
This was on the news, and some of you may have seen this. This is kind of a live view into what the storm surge looked like over time. And you can see that water starting to come from the storm surge, taking water from the northwest of Florida and the Gulf. If you looked out at Tampa at this point, it was literally, you couldn't see water from far as the eye could see. All that water had drained out and got brought around in that hurricane over to the northeast section of that storm. And here you can see these large storm surges, 7 to 12 feet. In some places, they're saying even up to 20 feet. And we're seeing homes, businesses being washed away. And surge flooding is some of the most scary, dangerous flooding that there is. Luckily, you have some time in preparation for knowing when it's coming versus a flash flood. But there's little you can do to protect your property at that point besides insurance. You couldn't really batten down that house or that building any way differently. When you have the ocean on your shores, it has a devastating impact. So that's kind of a view into what storm surge flooding looks like. And this was a terrible event down in the Naples area. But let me go ahead and give you an idea of fluvial river flow. And the reason I want to show you fluvial or river overflow
waters, the flooding that's happening in Northport to the point where it's backing up I-75, and there are water rescues that we just showed you. This is live helicopter.
This was also in Florida as well, but not by the ocean. These people had no risk of storm surge flooding. This was really the result of a lot of accumulation of rain over a longer period of time. This is relatively in the interior of the state. We had massive amounts of flooding in Orlando. And as that rain started to accumulate up north, Florida's geography, we had the Everglades down south, and all that water flows from north to south. So after the storm passed, everything was calm. All of a sudden, these rivers started to rise, and we're seeing massive amounts of river overflow in these areas. People stranded days after the hurricane where they thought they were free and clear, and all of a sudden those rivers rise all throughout the area of Florida in that interior on the way down to the Everglades. They do mention some very interesting points in this this video. So I'm gonna unmute it and let them talk for a moment because I think they have some good points here.
From Northport, and I'll read it to you. At this time, we don't know how sure the water will get, but the situation is, we're continuing to monitor the situation. Residents who feel unsafe and need to immediately evacuate from flooded areas are encouraged.
And there you can see that interior of the state up top.
Have been working around the
Peace River in Southwest Florida,
so,
and a lot of that water draining down south. The last item to show you is pluvial or flash flooding. This is definitely very relevant if you live in an area that has a mountainous region, or even as urbanization, or out west in the drought-stricken areas where a little bit of water can turn into a mudslide or flash flooding very quickly.
After working with thousands of independent P&C insurance agents, we've discovered the #1 thing holding them back.
Now to those severe storms overnight.
I don't know if any of you insurance agents get insurance ads all the time, but that's all I'm bombarded with. YouTube knows me well.
And parts of Texas soaked by more than a foot of rain. ABC's Marcus Moore.
Here we can see that water hitting the ground, starting to flow, and it can lift up a car with only
Michael,
a few
good morning.
feet
I'm
of
standing
water
on a
and a few inches.
3-lane roadway that is submerged
end up
in water.
moving
You
those
see
cars.
the cars flooded out just behind me off in the distance there. This community, this region, taking a real pounding overnight. Overnight, extreme flash flooding sweeping through towns from Texas to Pennsylvania.
Oh my God.
Entire neighborhoods in Weslaco, Texas, underwater. Roads washed away and fish washing in, going for a swim in the streets.
So that's kind of a detail of the 3 types of flooding that we talked about. I think those visuals are very helpful. And when you're having those conversations with your clients, understanding what they are at risk for. Even if you're not by the ocean, we always say where it can rain, it can flood. So they're surprisingly states like Arizona, where you have a lot of drought or low rainfall. When you have one major event, it can all of a sudden turn into a flash flood. If you're up in the Northeast with all the major river systems up there, you can have a lot of river overflow. Or even in different areas up north, you also have coastal surge. Massachusetts, all along the East Coast, you can also run into that same storm surge that we saw in Fort Myers Beach. That being said, let's dive into Hurricane Ian itself and what really happened. We were tracking the storm for quite some time. It ended up being a Category 1 when it was leaving Cuba. It was originally expected to hit the Big Bend of Florida, which is just north of Tampa, where Neptune Flood is based. So most of our company is based in the St. Petersburg, Tampa area. They were expecting it to hit just north, which would have mean we would have been on the southern or eastern part of that storm, which would have brought that storm surge around. Tampa is one of our #1 areas for flood insurance, and just the personal value in our area was quite concerning. But surprisingly, by the time it left Cuba, they started tracking that south. And within about 24 hours, that entire track changed from around the Tampa area all the way down to Fort Myers, where I had already evacuated from my home. Many of our colleagues had also evacuated at that point. Many people down south weren't expecting that. They woke up the next morning all of a sudden to find that they were right in the eye of the storm and that storm surge. So a lot of people may be wondering why people did not get out sooner. It was really a very quick change, and that distance between Cuba and Southwest Florida is very short. And as we saw in that short time span, not only did it change direction, but it also increased from a Category 1 to a Category 4, almost a Category 5 by the time of landfall. It made landfall in Cayo Costa. Fort Myers, Naples, Sanibel were on the eastern side of that storm, and that's where we were talking about that storm surge. The areas to the north or western part of that storm did not really experience much storm surge. That's where the water was drawn away versus coming towards. Like we talked about as well in that video, about 7 to 12 feet of storm surge, close to 20 inches of rain total throughout the state. A lot of focus was on those areas in Fort Myers and Naples, but multiple areas were flooding in Orlando in the middle of the state, as we talked about. And we saw that massive downstream effect where one river starts overflowing and it flows downstream. Little creeks, little side rivers, all of a sudden, all of them are overflowing. Many times when I'm quoting flood, I'm looking at the map and looking at the images. Agents may be wondering, why does this property have the rate that it does? You may see a small creek behind the home, and they say it's just a small creek. It's not the Delaware River. It's not the Ohio River. But the thing about those creeks is they are tributaries, downstream effect. When a river does overflow, it can lead to further overflows in some of those tributaries, such as those creeks. So looking at your client's geography, seeing what their risks are, even if it is a small creek, what does that creek connect to? Getting an idea that can really help you communicate what their individual risk is, which is really how Neptune does its quoting, with individual risk modeling per building, looking at elevation, looking at surge risk, looking at river overflow risk, and looking at multiple other factors. Speaking of Neptune, in our situation with Ian, we have had claims in about 38 counties spanning 5 states. About 500 claims have been filed, or 600 claims we're projecting so far, which is about the same number as we had with Ida, but we have about 2 times as many policies at this point as we did last year. So we're doing quite well comparatively, really making sure to get those first notice of losses out and get responding to those clients that have had losses and getting adjusters on the ground. We have about 5,000 total policies in that affected area of Southwest Florida, and about 30,000 policies total in Florida. This next image is a view of our claims. Every pink dot you see on the screen is an area where we've had a claim filed. Starting up, you can even see claims up in Virginia, North Carolina, where that hurricane had such a wide reach, and South Carolina as well, where it came off the East Coast and was still a hurricane when it hit. But you can obviously see the majority of those claims right in the path of the storm, starting in Southwest Florida, tracking up over Orlando as it headed on out. So that kind of gives you an idea of where we're having those claims, how many, and our response.
Alex, before you go any further, do you mind quickly just going back to the last slide?
Yep.
We had someone who would like to just quickly see that. And I don't know, Ian, if you had any particular question as it relates to this slide, but to add to this, just to give you all a sense of our claims experience with Ian and any other event, in case one of your insureds ask, you can file or submit a first notice of loss on behalf of your insured. You, the agent, can do that. You or the insured can call into Neptune, our main number. You can email Neptune, or you can leverage our chatbot and file a claim through our chatbot. Once a first notice of loss comes in, our team responds within a 24-hour SLA. Nearly 90% of that is actually responded to within the first 12 hours. So very quick turnaround onto the adjuster, and then the adjuster then is sent out to the property, and generally within 2 weeks, payments are starting to be made. So it's a very quick turnaround, and the entire Neptune team is on standby to assist both the adjusters, but also you, the agents. If you have any questions or expectation setting for the insureds, we are here to assist with all of that.
Thanks, Jean-Luc. I'll go ahead and share this one more time for anyone that may want to see it again, but there again, you can see the breakdown of claims. The next section we're going to be going to, I'm going to give you kind of a detail of how we quote before we turn it over to Attune and they walk through their side of the quoting process. But as you can see in those little circles, we're going to be seeing some more circles pop up on our screen in the next slide that I show. But really want to highlight that we do individual risk modeling. For each location that you put into Neptune through Attune, we're taking a look at that location, trying to get an understanding of that risk, which is ultimately what the NFIP is trying to do with their risk rating 2.0. We're on version, I believe, 138. So we're always improving that system, trying to get a better understanding so we can offer the right price per location. So we're not overcharging, we're not undercharging, we're trying to get that just right and be as competitive as possible. So I'll go ahead and head to the next screen that I want to show you. Let me go ahead and reshare my screen. I want to give you an idea of where we're quoting, but also kind of how we do that quoting. So I'm pulling up a screen right now, which is our Triton visualizer. Give it a few moments to populate, and you're going to be seeing some of those circles on the screen now in front of you. This is actually a live view into our quoting system. Every time you see a flash on that screen, that is an actual agent quoting and looking for flood insurance. We operate in 48 states plus DC. The only 2 states not writing in are Alaska and Kentucky, where we're doing commercial and all those other states. What you're seeing actually on that map when you see those flashes, you're going to see a green flash or a red flash. Green flashes indicate we're going to offer a quote. Red flashes indicate we are not offering a quote. We say yes about 98% of the time, so we're only saying no about 2% of the time, and that's a nationwide average. Obviously, though, you can see a little bit more of a consolidation among Houston, Texas, parts of Louisiana, and that southwest coast of Florida. But even on the aggregate, we're still at a 98% quote acceptance ratio. The second thing that we do when you enter a quote with us, though, is we're going to calculate that premium. If we look at a state like Illinois or Indiana, you can see different size circles on the screen, and that is indicative of the size of the premium. So when you enter an address, we are not only saying yes or no and doing risk selection, but we're also doing risk pricing. And that's all happening in real time. So you're not waiting on an underwriter. You can go from your BOP quote, immediately get that flood quote and be able to present that to your client. Instead of waiting on someone to get back to you, it really allows you to speed through that process a little bit more fluidly. The last thing that we do on this screen has to do with our carrier providers. You can see 4 buckets down in the bottom left-hand corner, and these represent our 4 current carriers. We're about to add a 5th, another Lloyd's of London syndicate, but let's go through these 4 here. So we have 2 Lloyd's of London syndicates already. We have Indian Harbor, and then we have Transverse. All of our carriers are A- or better by AM Best. And what we're doing when we're on the screen is spreading out that risk among our carriers. So if the hurricane were to hit, Fort Myers like it did. Not all of our policies are with Lloyd's of London there. They're spread out among our carriers, which allows us to not only protect them and their financial stability, but also allows us to better respond to claims as they're not overloaded on that end. Like I said, we're going to be adding one more carrier in another Lloyd's of London syndicate by the end of the year. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Shane, and he's going to walk through the quoting process on the Attune side, and then he'll pass it back to me to finish it on the Neptune side.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Let me get my screen up here. Did it come through for everyone?
Yep.
Awesome. So don't mind my test beforehand, and I hope you're all familiar with the Attune portal so far. But we've actually designed our portal to make it as seamless as possible to get a flood quote. It can take you 5 minutes tops. All you need to do is go ahead and start to create an account. So I'm just going to do Shane Flood 39 132 Central Ave. And as you can see in our portal, we try to pre-populate the address for you. So as you go through, you can click whichever you're looking for, and it'll pre-populate everything else that you need. For this, let's say it's a restaurant. So if you're here just for flood, all you have to do is scroll down and select get a quote for the flood. But say you also want to do a BOP first and bundle it with the flood. What you need to do is go click get a quote in our business owners policy. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through the full BOP quote. But say you go through everything, it would then bring you to this page. It will obviously show the BOP quote, but what we'll do is we'll automatically ping Neptune through API and get an indication of what the price might be. From here, you can click visit Neptune, and that will lead you to, it'll give you some fun facts, I should say interesting facts, not necessarily fun facts, that might be good for selling or something that you just need to know. And from there, you can click go to quote, or you can see all other previous quotes. So say you're already on an account, but you remembered, hey, I should double check if X insured has made payment. You can click see all quotes there. For this case, let's click go to quote. And this will bring you right to the Neptune portal where you can go and make any adjustments to your limits. I'll let Alex go through most of this and fill in any additional information. One thing to note, though, in the current Attune portal is our API is set up only for the commercial product that Neptune offers. This does not mean that you can't write residential. So with our relationship with Neptune, you can write every product that Neptune offers, residential, condo, RC BAP. And if you wanted to do that, what you would need to do is you could either go into the quote, click get a quote, and then go to the top left to Neptune agency portal. And this will bring you to the entire Neptune portal. All you need to do is enter the address once more. Let's see here, 220. Here we are. Click create quote. Next, confirm. And this will show you the entire shelf that Neptune offers. You can also, instead of going into the actual quote first and then backpedaling, all you would need to do is click see all policies right here. Oh, it's gonna make me log in. Sorry about that. And this will bring you right to the Neptune portal itself. So you could start from right there. So there are two options to get to the full shelf that Neptune offers. But again, our portal right now is designed for commercial. It's just one thing to note. You're more than welcome to create an account for a home, say in Florida, but you need to know that when you click create a quote, you're not necessarily in the right product for that insured. But with that, I will pass it back to, actually, before I pass to Alex, I'll pause for any questions in case anyone wants to see it again. I know it might have been a little quick.
Thanks, Shane. We'll see if any questions come through here. If you have any questions about the Neptune portal, I'll be going into a little bit more detail on that in just a moment.
I can't see the question box right now. I'm assuming silence is golden at the moment.
Yeah, no questions currently in the chat box.
Perfect. But yeah, like I said, I'll stop sharing my screen. We try to make it as seamless as possible. So even if you're here for even a workers' comp or a general liability product or something like that, we will still ping Neptune Flood and show you that indication. So it's always something to have in the back of your mind and great for a cross-sell opportunity.
Thanks, Shane. So we are inside the quote that Shane created. Here we can see Ferg Sports Bar and Grill. This is a location right on Central Ave in St. Petersburg, about 5 minutes from our office. A very popular and long-standing restaurant in our area. Here we can go ahead and at the top, select our effective date for the coverage. Most effective dates or waiting periods for flood insurance is 30 days. So the NFIP has a 30-day wait. With Neptune, we only have a 10-day waiting period, which means you can get coverage into effect much quicker. With today's date being the 11th, we now have effective date of 10/21. We also allow you to waive that 10-day waiting period for 2 reasons. As you can see here, you can go ahead and waive that for real estate transactions. So if it's a closing or a refinance, you can go ahead and waive that 10-day wait, get coverage into effect same day or any day in between. You can also waive it for a rollover. So if you have an NFIP or a private flood policy already in effect, is coming up for a renewal, let's say on 10/14, you can go ahead and waive that 10-day waiting period and get that effective date to match. Up at the top, though, we can see our quote number, and our quotes are valid in the system for up to 60 days. A little bit further down, we have a few questions about eligibility. This being a non-residential property, obviously it'll be no for residential use. If it has residential use, it'd be one of our other product types, where, as Shane says, you can go back and run a new quote. For prior flood losses, we do allow 1 loss less than 25,000, but if it's a loss for 25,000 or more than 1 loss, we would reject that property. Basically, just looking at severity and frequency. We define a prior flood loss as a claim that's been filed and paid. So it has to be a flood insurance loss that they have. If they're buying the property and they don't know this, you go ahead and you can put no. But if they've been there for, let's say 10 years and they have a $50,000 flood loss, they got that check in the mail, they cashed it, and then they say no, that's really where you'll run into the issues. But generally speaking, all we ask is that you answer to the best of your ability, and the insured does as well. Down a bit further, you're going to see property information. We do pre-fill this information for you. So you can see year built, square footage, and flood zone have already been entered. And that is something we are obtaining from that specific property in that location. Now, you do have the ability to edit this. So if it's actually 1940, you can go ahead and make that change. You can also edit the square footage if that is wrong, as well as the flood zone. One thing to keep in mind if you're purchasing building coverage is that we do have 100,000 square feet max. So we don't insure buildings for building coverage if they're over 100,000 square feet. Underneath flood zone, you're also going to see a little box that says, I want to upload an EC, standing for elevation certificate. You can go ahead and add an elevation certificate on. I actually recommend it a lot. There's a lot of talk in the industry with the NFIP no longer requiring elevation certificates. Neptune doesn't require them either. A lot of people just aren't going out and getting them, which is perfectly fine. You can save up to $1,000 and not having to go out and get that cost. But if you have a risky property or your client does, I still would recommend it, as what you're really doing is providing us with an elevation value, which can update our rate. If you go ahead and enter in that value and it helps the rate, that's great. You leave it in there. You just save your client some money. All you need to do is upload that post-bind as a trailing document. If for some reason it does not help the rate, you can go ahead and take that out with no penalty. So there really is no downside risk if you have an elevation certificate available. But if you have to go out and buy one, that is obviously a cost-benefit analysis that you will have to do. The remaining questions are quite simple. We'll go ahead and answer construction type. This is wood frame, does not have a basement. It is 2 stories. Now we can go ahead and edit our coverage. We have $500,000 on the building coverage. We have a minimum of $50,000, and we can go all the way up to $4 million as well, which is 8 times the amount of coverage that the NFIP offers. So we really allow you to provide that expansive coverage. One thing to think about is really not if your client needs flood, it's how much flood insurance do they need for that location. So if you have a property on the water in Naples where the risk is surge flooding is something that can be a total loss. It's really important to be able to provide adequate limits, which is something Neptune does. If you only have 500,000 with the NFIP, we looked at that building we saw earlier in that video, 500,000 would not be able to replace waterfront property in Naples, Florida. So it's devastating impact when people are underinsured, but we really try to provide those limits so you can offer those adequate rates. You can also go anywhere in between though. So really just providing you that flexibility to offer as many quotes at as many limits as you would need. Something else to point out as well, maybe your owner or your client is a tenant in this restaurant. A lot of people, I've seen a lot of policies from Attune come in that are contents only. And the way you can do that is by selecting I rent. You can then bring the building coverage down to 0 and do a contents only policy. So that's another something to think about for your clients that are tenants. Maybe they are on the water, they don't own the building, but they want to protect their contents. Definitely a great option. Lastly, we have deductibles from $1,250 to $50,000, and then we have a BI coverage that the NFIP does not offer as well. It provides $500 a day for up to 50 days after a 14-day wait, and that comes out to a total of $25,000. About 8 to 9% of our policyholders currently have this added on, which shows us that not only is this something insureds are looking for, it's something agents have been able to sell. At this point, though, you have finalized the quote. You have your final premium. This includes taxes and fees. It is that final rate. All we need to do is go ahead and enter in our named insured, the contact information for that named insured, their email, and their phone number. If you were wondering about my phone number and email, this is that information. Feel free to reach out to me with any commercial related questions. And then lastly, we can update our mailing address and add up to 3 lien holders or additional interests. At this point, all we have to do is go down here and press bind. But if you want to go ahead and view that quote first, you want to download that PDF to send off to your client, you can go ahead and click view quote. It'll have all the information about the limits, the premium, your agency information listed at the bottom of the quote. And then on the second page, it has the wording that all the banks are looking for, stating we meet all the mandatory requirements. At this point.
Oh, Alex, sorry. Before you go ahead and bind, I just wanted to, if you don't mind scrolling back up to the prior loss section. A question came in just to expand on this, and so figured I'd touch on this a little bit more here, or say it a different way. So the prior loss question is related to all of our product types. We are on the commercial form at the moment, so in my example, I'll use a commercial building. Let's say your named insured built this building 5 years ago, and they have owned it since. The question is applicable for those 5 years that they have owned it since it was built by them. To the best of their knowledge, right? And I would assume that they're going to know the answer to that. Let's say they bought the building last year, and the building was built 5 years ago. Let's say they have no idea in those prior 4 years if there was a flood, and it was not disclosed on the closing statements. Then the answer would only be applicable for the time that they have owned that building. Now, the other side of that is, let's say they bought the building last year, and however, it was built 5 years ago, but in the closing statement, it was disclosed that they did have a flood, then this answer would need to be answered based on the appropriateness of what was disclosed in those closing statements. Kristen, I hope that answers your question. If any additional questions come out of that, please let me know. Thanks, Alex, and I'll turn it back over to you to go ahead and bind.
Thanks for giving a little bit more detail there. Let's say we got that answer resolved, and now we're ready to go ahead and bind. You can come right into the system, press the bind button. You can bind this at 10 p.m. tonight. You can bind it on the weekend. You can bind it on a holiday. We really give you that ability to go in there and bind the business when ready for you. So we'll go ahead and press that button. It will go ahead and bring us through the signature process. This is for you as the agent to sign. So we can see up here, signing as the agent. We're acknowledging our waiting period. If we're waiving that waiting period, we're acknowledging that we need to provide those documents, either the closing statement or the prior deck page. After you go ahead and sign, we do give you the option to go ahead and make payment. This is a direct bill policy, so we will send that information to the insured to collect payment. If for any reason they provided you with that information, you can go ahead and submit that now by ACH credit card, or you can always mail in a check. but you can also skip over that. So unlike the NFIP, when you bind a policy with the NFIP, you have to submit payment with the application. With Neptune, we just require payment. Well, we encourage payment by the effective date. We also have a 30-day grace period to get that payment in before the policy will void for non-payment. Here we can see on the policy management page a breakdown of some information about the building. Scrolling down a bit further, we're going to see complete access to the policy jacket immediately available after binding. Even prior to making payment, we're going to give you all these documents. We could also go ahead and pull the deck page, copies of the application, and invoice. We're going to send out an email to the insured at the email address provided. So if we hopped into my email here, we would be able to see the email that we send to the insured. At this point, the insured will get the email, they'll be able to click to log in, and then they'll be able to sign and pay through their own process and move through all the questions that we ask. If for any reason they do not receive that email, we could always go ahead and actually resend that or resend it to a different email by clicking the resend email link. And we can send this as many times as we like. We are in our testing system right now, so some of our functions are a little bit slower than they normally would be compared to our production environment. But if you ever run into any problems, you can always resend that to a different email address or resend it again. Some other information we can see here, we can see it's not been paid yet, not been signed by the insured, agent has signed it. Scrolling down, we also have information about the insured, agency, and location. If for any reason you want to send a copy of the application, you're more than welcome to download a copy, send it off via DocuSign, and upload that to the policy. You can absolutely do that. You don't have to use our signature system, but we highly recommend it as it allows it to track that and mark off whether or not they signed a little bit easier. See a few questions coming through. Will you write in A and V zones with negative elevation in Florida? That's a good question. Generally, nationwide, we have a -6 minimum. So -6 is our general minimum. But in Florida, I know we do have a elevation requirement. I can't remember if it's -1 or 0. Jean-Luc, do you have any idea on the exact?
Yeah, it's -1 for most of Florida, and then some parts of Southwest Florida are 0, but for the most part, it's -1.
Yes. So there are certain areas of the country, parts of Louisiana, Harris County, Texas, where Houston's based. There are a few areas where it's a little bit stricter than the -6 general nationwide requirement, but those are put in place to help mitigate that risk. There's another question, since it's E&S, are there issues with closings that don't occur and we can't get in touch with the client for mortgagee build? If the closing doesn't occur, that is a valid cancellation reason. You just reach out to the Attune team or to the Neptune team, letting them know the closing did not occur, and we'd be able to cancel that policy with a full refund, whether it was paid or not. If it's not been paid, it just cancels and you're good to go. Any more questions like that? Definitely feel free to go ahead and ask. Are there specific persons authorized to sign on behalf of a commercial client? Generally speaking, whoever is the representative of that named insured, maybe it's the owner of the LLC. Generally, we'd want the person that is the applicant to be the one signing it. That is the general rule of what we're looking for. Yes, you can just email Neptune stating closing did not occur with the policy number, maybe an email from the bank or an affidavit stating that that closing did not occur. Alrighty, so that is kind of the breakdown. One other thing I want to show you before we hop back to the last slide of the PowerPoint is the endorsement button. Not only can you go ahead and quote and bind on Neptune, you can also do endorsements, dollar and non-dollar, by clicking this button here. My computer's been a little bit slow. Let's see if it loads on this in our testing environment. If it doesn't load, just know that you can press that. It'll bring you back to a page quite similar to the quoting page we just saw. It does not look like it's loading for me at the moment. But just know that is something you are able to do. You could also reach out to our chat box on our system if you need to do an endorsement, make a payment, cancel a policy. There's a few questions about that. You can actually do that all through our 24/7 ADA chatbot. That being said, I'll go ahead and bring us back over to the PowerPoint. Don't hesitate to keep putting those questions in the chat box. We'll keep answering them. But there is one more slide I want to go over. Neptune best practices. And this really goes into how do you utilize the knowledge that you've got here today. The first thing I would always say is know your area, your geography, and your history. Looking at those different types of flooding that we talked about, looking at the geographical features, whether it's mountains and rivers versus the ocean or the desert. Knowing that will really tailor how you talk about flooding, how your insureds probably think about flooding, and will really help you sell it better, especially considering it's such a product that is underinsured. A lot of people just don't think they need it. It's important to be able to have some facts behind you for why it is a valuable coverage to add on there. Second point, forget mandatory versus non-mandatory. And really what that comes into play is flood zones. NFIP has used flood zones for their rating purposes for the past 60 years. They just last year stopped using flood zone for the actual rate. So whether it's an X zone or an A zone, they're not even looking at it anymore. The only purpose of X versus A versus V anymore is whether it's going to be required by a bank. The fact of the matter, though, is 25% of all flood claims happen outside of mandatory flood zones. That is a very large percentage. And people just think that because they're in the non-mandatory flood zone, they're not at risk. Those maps are quite outdated. It takes a long time for FEMA to get in there and make those changes and update those surveys. Really taking a look outside of that and get an idea of what that risk is, because just looking at whether it's mandatory or not is not going to tell you whether or not they are at risk. If you can start thinking about flood as more of a full package of protection, the BOP is not covering this peril. It is a very costly peril. It is not the most common on an individual basis, which we'll talk about next. But when it does happen, it is very severe. So being able to offer that full coverage of protection to your clients. Like I just said, it can be a rare occurrence locally. We're not going to expect this to happen next year to Fort Myers or the Sanibel Island area. But if it happens every 50 years, that is still a pretty devastating impact. It's going to take many, many years for that area to rebuild. And still, flooding is the #1 disaster in the United States. We've seen flooding already in Yellowstone, in Mississippi, Kentucky, multiple different areas around the country that have had inland flooding. And then we've also just seen what really has made the news being Hurricane Ian and that surge flooding. Something to talk about with your clients when they say it won't ever happen to me, which is a very, very common phrase, is play that tape. Does your client have $90,000 to self-insure? Is that something they're able to manage? Or are they comfortable paying, is it $800 a year? $800 a year versus the 50 years that they could own the property. Personally, in my own home, I end up buying flood insurance. I'm in a flood zone X. It was about $450 a year. Considering where I live and what I just went through, I'm very happy I bought that. It's something that even if it only happens once in that time frame, it makes it worth it. Lastly, many claims are much higher than that 90,000. So if you look down in Naples, the average commercial flood claim is 90,000. But in that situation we just saw, we're going to be seeing the full limit on those NFIP policies and on some of our policies going all the way up into the millions of dollars for those buildings. So claims can be much higher than that average. And when you're talking about that, do you have the ability to recover from that? Do you have money set aside for something? How would you respond if this occurred? And regarding to habits and processes, create a flow. Habits are formed by these processes. So when you're quoting flood at new business and renewal, quote it on every property. And what we really do with the tune is allow you to do that. Every BOP you're running, you have the ability to add on that flood policy and make it a part of your agency's system and operations. Not only can it protect your E&O, especially if you're doing a disclosure and having them sign that if they decline, which is very common in Florida and Texas and a lot of the other big flood states, but also it can really grow that revenue and offer that full protection of full package of protection to your client. Lastly, I'll leave you with a quote from our CEO, Trevor Burgess. If we have learned anything from Ida and Ian, it's that the message for our agents is not if their clients should buy flood insurance, but how much flood insurance they should buy. And I think that is a very good point after the two events that we've seen. And hopefully flood does not continue to be such an underinsured peril as what we're seeing with Hurricane Ian has been devastating, especially being so close to home in our area. We're really working hard to get our clients back up on their feet and even people that are not our clients, trying to help out in our community to make sure they're able to rebuild and get their lives back. Thank you very much for your time. I do see 2 outstanding questions in there. Feel free to continue to go ahead and put questions in, and we're happy to answer them. So it looks like one of those questions was actually already answered, but any other questions, feel free to put them in.
Alex, I think there's one from John Cotton here.
How did the actual flood claim losses from Ian differ from what your model predicted? Did this change your confidence in the model pricing eligibility? Jean-Luc, I think you'll probably have a better view into this, but with 600 claims in that area across the 5 states, it's looking like we've done a pretty good job with our model. We're still having claims. It's pretty much unavoidable when you're writing flood insurance in Florida, especially with an event like this. But it really has shown us, compared to the NFIP and some other private markets, we're offering the right premium for the risk, and ultimately doing pretty well with our model. But Jean-Luc, any other thing to add to that?
No, I mean, that's right. We still have quite a few claims coming in or trickling in at this point, day by day, from Hurricane Ian, just given the widespread devastation and that the evacuations that took place, the internet that is down, the remoteness. My partner built homes down there, and he had mentioned that it looks like a war zone down there, and that home that he lives in to build these homes won't get power back until October 31st is what they said. So some people still have yet to get down, fully assess, and so these claims will come in day by day. Ultimately, once these claims stop coming in, we'll be able to reflect and do a full analysis on our flood claims, our losses, and what our models predicted. At the current moment, what we can say is the disaggregation that we do in real time that Alex had mentioned or shown on the Triton visualizer, along with the algorithms, et cetera, are working. It is doing what is intended to do, and for our capacity providers, and then we are also standing ready and working with our insureds to make sure that they are, for the ones that have been able to submit their FNOLs, they are on the road to recovery from a financial perspective. We'll certainly have more information that comes out, I would say, probably another week or two. We'll have a better sense of the full flood claims and losses and relative to how our model predicted, and we'll be able to come back to the Attune team and share that and leverage it as a case study, talking points, whatever it may be. But to give you a sense from what we have seen so far is expecting to have our loss ratio maybe around the 45% range, whereas the NFIP will likely be in the 200-250% range. So our confidence in the model, pricing, eligibility, et cetera, remains very high. We are on model version 132. So we are constantly updating and tweaking the system to be better and better. And so we will do a full review and analysis and share any findings.
That was a very good question. See if any more come through, but I do want to thank you all for taking some time out of your day to learn a little bit more about our response to Hurricane Ian, the event itself, and the partnership with Attune. Any other comments from the team?
I'd just like to thank everyone for joining the webinar. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to either Neptune or the Attune team. We also have a chat function on our portal. So if for any reason you have trouble even making an account before you can get to Neptune, feel free to reach out to us as well. And we'd be happy to assist.
Yeah, and just one last reminder that this webinar is recorded, so I'll be sending the recording out, as well as the slide deck and any other information that was mentioned during this presentation, and anything if the Neptune team has PDFs or anything they want to send out, we'll send that as well. And yeah, thank you, Jean-Luc and Alex. Glad that you both stayed safe during the hurricane. And yeah, thanks so much for putting this together. This was so interesting.
Awesome.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Morgan. Thank you, everyone.